depending on where you want to draw the line of where humanity began and stopped just being one of the lesser hominids, we've spent the better part of a few 100,000 years, if not a million or more, hunkering around campfires, telling stories to each other about our days. And the good stories, the memorable stories, tend to be the ones that were exciting and had some sort of thrill and tension. Will the antagonist make it through to the end and achieve their goal? All that kind of stuff. I remember, at a fairly young age, kind of, occasionally pondering why it seemed to be that, like, every last single video game seemed to involve some sort of, combat or, the simulated killing of other things, whether they be man or manimal. And, of course, to this day, there's conversations within the gaming community for role-playing games as to whether or not combat should have the emphasis it has. Now, there's a reason why combat is a central focus of so many role-playing games, and it's not only because of the fact that D&D piggybacked off of Chainmail, which was a war game, which is explicitly about combat, except on like military scale engagements. It's an easy device to create tension. Now, for the players, who the players are also themselves the audience in many ways, they get their little character sheet and all that kind of stuff. It has a bunch of numbers on it, which, help them accomplish tasks and stuff. But the thing that creates tension on that character sheet is that little number next to hit points. The hit points don't represent the meat and blood of the character. In many ways, they tend to be overly used as, an attack hit the character and struck and did 5 points of damage, so therefore they must have some sort of scratch or cut, or they're lightly jabbed. And that's not necessarily what it really means. As I say, they're more of they're a tension device. They're entirely a tension device, because it's watching that little number slowly get whittled down and closer to zero, as your character's engaged in some sort of life and death struggle, that creates the tension that leads to you getting the sensation of release and catharsis upon victory. You made it through this combat. You didn't get to zero. Likewise, there is kind of another effect going on too of the other kind of catharsis of you didn't survive. Your character's lost. You have to start over. And of course, as the years have gone by, D&D itself and most other role-playing games in their different ways have tweaked with this model, and sometimes misunderstanding some role-playing game rules, lean too much into the idea that your hit points are the actual physical meat of your body and, are supposed to be a measurement of blood loss and physical damage, and kind of forgetting that, like, in the end, in terms of what they're actually doing in the game, not the game world, is that they are purely a tension device. One of the ironies I find in some ways of the kind of audience I seem to have built up here on YouTube is that in many ways I am one of those dungeon masters that do a lot of the things that y'all complain about the lefties doing. The thing is I don't take like the arrogant stance of like, this is the only way you should game. Instead, I am more, when I have my own players, I'm trying to, do the thing that Rian Johnson failed at, which is the proper way of subverting people's expectations, which you don't just do from the get-go, and it still has to have a logical thing. But for a long time, I have been one of those people that plays around with exactly what does good and evil even mean, and frequently will flip the polarity on like which fantasy race is supposed to be the bad guy and which one's supposed to be the good guy in this adventure scenario. Common touchstone that most people get is the idea that, if you find out that the orcs are actually the sympathetic ones and were driven down from their mountain homeland by events, and that's the only reason why they've been raiding the farmers and stuff, and this is all actually caused by the elves, who, despite, seeming benevolent and allies with the human kingdom, are, secretly hoping to, weaken, their economic position so that, they can fall further under, like elf control and all that kind of stuff, or to regain control of some ancient site that they just for some reason can't bring themselves to just come out and tell the humans that they want, because then they're afraid that the humans would ask too high a price for it, or all that other kind of stuff. Flipping the idea that the ugly people are actually the ones you should take the side of, and that the beautiful people, who have power and wealth are the ones that are actually like secretly pulling the strings. I also frequently will do a thing where like those functional, happy, well-developed, civilized kingdoms will tend to be ruled ultimately by lawful evil people. And those kingdoms that are belligerent and are likely to start wars and try to conquer their neighbors and go on great big, purging Inquisition type crusades and all that kind of stuff will be your lawful good societies. In many ways, I prefer the original Beckme version of alignment, where it was just law, neutrality, and chaos. I would kind of wish they hadn't brought good and evil into the equation at all. However, for my understanding of how things unfolded, there had been like a frequency of complaints from people that because of the way the creature sections in the old D&D books had been designed, you would typically find that the bad guys tend to all have chaos alignments, and the good guy type creatures and NPCs would all have law or neutral as their alignment. And so, I guess the idea was to add good and evil to actually add nuance to law and chaos, not the other way around, because fundamentally, the alignment system that, OSR games, D&D, and most other role-playing games that have any form of alignment are trying to, provide an alternative to. The core is still the law-chaos axis. Good and evil were supposed to be secondary to that, and yet they have taken over the conversation. I feel like, especially with the conversation around orcs and their use of evil, I feel like it's a both sidesism, but like it's all being treated too simplistically. The thing is like I say, I'll have sympathetic orcs in my games, and I've used this device several times. However, I don't change their alignment to good. I still leave them as chaotic evil creatures. It's just that, they're still intelligent and still have some level of rationality, so that, you can reason with them if they can see an immediate benefit to themselves, and that there is a pattern to what led them to be doing the things that they're doing. And that if they can be reasoned with and bought off, or you do help them do something so that they can regain their territory, you can, put an end to the conflict with the minimal amount of bloodshed and all that kind of stuff. You don't need to make them into good guys in order for them to be able to be sympathetic, basically, is what I'm saying. In much the same way that, a lawful evil king, queen, emperor, high magistrate, whatever, could be an extremely charming, friendly, reasonable person, is just ultimately, in the end, their goals are about acquiring wealth and personal power. The thing is people who are really hot and bothered about wealth and personal power is that this will require them to have to make all sorts of deals and relationships and, keep a power structure intact and in place so they can enjoy and reap the benefits of all that they have built and all that kind of stuff. Whereas lawful good is super judgmental, totalitarian. This, whatever interpretation of good is that, that culture is going for, anything that is not of the good, because it has the lawful framework on top of it, is therefore, sinful, heretical, verboten, halal, must be dealt with and driven forth and purged and cleansed. Even the chaotic good is not good enough, because chaotic good will tolerate the evil and its presence and all that kind of stuff, because chaotic good is more your benevolent, enlightened self-interest. I kind of feel is probably where chaotic good rests in a more nuanced modern day outlook, and not just the Saturday morning cartoon interpretation of what good and evil are. Combat, hell, ironically, Rifts is famous for its overindulgent combat rules and overpowered characters that are just bristling with guns and hit points in the form of MDC, and every character gets a tank and a flying robot and a jetpack and a flamethrower and all. It's over the top, and yet I have combat erupt in my Palladium games very seldom, with the exception of Heroes Unlimited. That's really about the only Palladium game I've ever run where combat has been a frequent occurrence. Generally, though, when running Rifts, people are talking. I tend to run political games where characters are like serving, like some influential person in the region or nation that they find themselves in, and are being sent on tasks that I don't necessarily put them where they're the one doing the big important thing, but they're helping set up the big important thing that's going on in the background, so they still feel like they're having an impact on the setting without having them doing things that are kind of above their pay grade in terms of like their character's level and all that kind of stuff, especially for beginning characters. Hypothetically, if you could ever get a Rifts game to drag out multiple years and you start getting characters that actually are higher in level, then you would switch more over to them being the ones doing the direct thing in terms of like nation building. But still, I tend to more go for like surface level wilderness exploration and local town, local state, local country kind of political machinations. I'm not a fan of dungeon crawls. But the thing that's critical to like making any of these games successful is that there has to be stakes in order for there to be, once again, back to the combat thing, that you have tension. Combat's easy for people to understand. You don't know your character yet, you don't know the game world yet, but you do know that that thing over there is trying to hit you with a stick, and you don't want your hit points to go to zero because you spent all that time making this character and coming up with a backstory. So it's incumbent upon you to start hitting that thing with a stick back. I tend to find, especially with newer players, some players kind of get stuck into just this combat loop of roll to attack, creature attacks back, attack, with very little thought of like withdrawal or like, maybe I didn't even need to get into this fight in the first place. As long as there's a goal and something at stake, you don't actually have to have the combat. It's just that the combat's easiest to understand, easiest to establish the tension. Building tension over needing to, find this piece of evidence to undermine someone's conspiracy to take down the barony that you live in, doesn't really work until the players have had a chance to kind of feel some sort of attachment to the environment within the game. Otherwise, they don't really have as much reason to care. It's not like they invested their time and energy into, coming up with all the NPCs and names of the taverns and shops and the nobles and coming up with, how the different cults, they're not the ones that invested their time in any of that. So it's going to take longer for them to care. And yet, from the get-go, you want little tension devices. And so combat serves its purpose in that, unless you can be creative. Or, as I like to do, I tie the player characters as much into the actual initial story events of whatever the opening adventure is, so that even without necessarily having to, jump into a fight with ninjas right off the bat and all that kind of stuff, they still feel some reason why they're invested in seeing things through and accomplishing their character's goal, because if it's tied to the character that they just made as much as possible, they will feel more interest in it. Until you've played several sessions, several months, and you've actually started to have people kind of become attached to the NPCs and towns and stuff, though it's within the game environment that you're crafting as a dungeon master, combat's, just the easiest way to get them to care about what's going on. It's relevant, it's right in their face. But it is not the only thing to do. Older BECMI stuff and OSR stuff also, of course, has your puzzles and traps. That kind of sweeps into just kind of a general overall adventure excitement kind of category that combat itself falls into. But anyway, the idea that you want to get rid of it is a bit extreme, but at the same time, there's no reason why you have to rely on it as a crutch. Just understand why it's there and work to find other ways to simulate that without having to use it, if that's your wish. Anyway, stay waspinated.